Hello, hello. So, this word here is in regards to those that are on the kingdom spouse journey. Again, it may not be for everybody, but for those that are. If you've been on the journey for a while, and if you've tuned into any of my past messages in regards to the kingdom spouse journey, then this one may resonate as well, especially if those ones resonated, right? But if you find yourself in a position where you're a true child of God, whether chosen or not, but a child of God, and you found yourself on a journey towards the Lord and a journey ultimately towards holiness and righteousness, again, this is very specific. This dynamic may only fit for some, but if you have a spouse that the Lord had once upon a time anointed and appointed for you and you only, the spouse and you have free will, you both do, right? But like we've talked about in the past about Jonah also had free will, but ultimately God's will was done, right? However, you are so cherished by the Lord and so protected, right? Because you've stayed so close to him. That's what the Lord wanted, because one of the biggest things, I talked about this in yesterday's word, one of the biggest sins is idolizing, right? So it's a fine line, because the Lord wants you to obviously esteem your spouse, cherish your spouse, love them and care for them, right? And put them not on a pedestal, but as a female, you should be looking at your spouse as like a king, and if you're a king, you should be looking at your spouse as like a queen, right? Again, going back to the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve, I mean, you know, God made Adam and then took a rib from Adam to make Eve, right? So that's the thing, is that the Lord has from the very beginning made it so that man and women are bonded, right? And again, it was one Adam, one Eve, and taking the one rib for the one mate, right? It wasn't God giving a bunch of ribs to a bunch of women, you know, or men, right? It was one for one, right? Therefore, bonding them together. And the Lord is saying that's also like the seal of marriage, is that, you know, it's a bond, right? So if the spouse had a choice, and I put out words about this before, the spouse, doesn't matter if you're male or female, your spouse is male or female, this is just a generic message for all that the Lord gave me, and kind of like an update too, I guess, if it resonates. The Lord gave the spouse a choice where they could either choose, like I say, the left path, which is like the path of the devil, or the right path, which is the path of the Lord. Ultimately, the Lord wanted to save your spouse and some of their counterfeits, right? But you once upon a time had a ton of counterfeits in your life, and we've talked about this before, where it's not just a spouse is viewed as a counterfeit, right? The devil is a counterfeit. The devil looks like the real deal, but he's really not. He'll make somebody look like they're the proper partner for you, but they're really not. As we know, the devil doesn't come dressed as the ugly devil. The devil comes dressed like an angel, right? To fool people. And the only way to truly discern what's of the devil and what's of God is to walk with God, because only God can reveal and take the blinders off and the mask off of things to reveal the true colors and the true, you know, person underneath, right? Things that look like they're made of the devil can actually be of God, because the devil's trying to make that thing of God look like it's devilish, right? But vice versa, things that look like they're made of God can actually be made of the devil, because the devil is trying to conceal themselves to appear like they're of God, right? So therefore, if you've been on the journey and you're the spouse that's more ahead and walks closer with the Lord, you already have that wisdom and discernment where you can view in no time flat the things of God and the things of the devil. God was trying to train your spouse to be in that same way, like to walk with the Lord and be alongside you. Like in the book of Genesis, we don't hear that Adam's with the Lord and Eve's over there talking to 5 different guys. We don't hear that. And vice versa. We don't hear that, you know, Eve is there with the Lord being made of Adam's rib, and then, you know, Adam's turning around talking to 6 different girls. That's not what it talks about. It talks about there's the 2 of them in the garden, right? And that bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, right? I will call her woman, right? Because she's made from me. So there's a bonding. So of course we know in the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve weren't married. They didn't go to a church, and she wasn't wearing a white dress, and, you know, they had an official wedding. But the Lord is saying that when, from the very beginning of time, in the book of Genesis with Adam and Eve is like the first, 5-10 pages of the Bible, right? That's where it all began. So the Lord is saying that when he created Adam, that's the Lord, he created all of us, he created human. But when he took a rib from Adam and created Eve, that was a marriage. That was a symbolic marriage, because it was taking a part of him and a part of her and bonding it together. Now today, we're obviously not taking ribs out of each other, but we're coming together as one. That solidarity it comes together today just as it did back then, right? So there's that symbolism there. So the Lord is saying that he wanted your spouse to get on the very same page as you, the very same journey as you, to have your spouse coming to the Lord so that the Lord could get the glory, and not only bringing two people together and bonding them as one like he did once upon a time with Adam and Eve, but also so that he could save your soul and your spouse's soul, and save you all from the counterfeits that surrounded you, right? Because counterfeits are jobs. Like, a job can look like it's a great thing for you, but it's really not. That's a counterfeit opportunity. A person can come in your life and it can look like they're something good for you, friend, lover, partnership, whatever. It doesn't necessarily always have to be romantic. And you could think that that's the right union for you, and it's not, right? It's the devil disguising himself in these opportunities and in these people. Of course, that person is going to come to you as a friend and a good person. It's not until you trust them and let them in your home, or, put your guard down, that you start to see their true colors. Of course, that business opportunity looks and sounds great, but once you get in the mix, then there's problems. It's just like the old saying of saying, don't go into business with friends or family, don't lend money to friends or family, like certain things like this. Why? Is because 99% of the time it blows up in your face. Why? Because it's counterfeit situations, people, places, and things that are sent by the devil to try to trip you up on purpose, right? We have to remember that the enemy never sleeps. He spends all day, every day, trying to trip people up. So whether you work for the devil or God, the devil is out there trying to trip you up irregardless, right? And so once you came to the Lord, you started to see all the counterfeit things that surrounded you, and the Lord bestowed upon you wisdom and discernment to continue seeing counterfeit things. And it's your duty as a soldier for God to be discerning and wise when these things try to, because of course Satan's going to send them to you all the more, right? He always did your whole life, and he's going to even more still when you're walking with the Lord, because it's trying to test you. So you can best believe that even though you walk with the Lord, you're protected, but the devil's still going to do what the devil does and try to send counterfeit situations, counterfeit people, counterfeit positions, right? But because you walk with the Lord protects you, and you have wisdom and discernment to shut those things down before they even take a root. That is the template that the Lord wanted for your spouse, right? Your spouse was also surrounded with counterfeit things, just as you were. Counterfeit jobs, counterfeit people, counterfeit friends, counterfeit lovers, all counterfeits. It took you time to sift through it, but you did, and now you have no counterfeit things around you, right? But your spouse, they chose the devil ultimately. Like I said, the right path or the left path. You chose the right path, and you had a choice, but the spouse chose the left path of the devil, aka the world. Your spouse chose to stick with the world instead, right? Why? Not because you weren't the one, or you weren't good enough, or this, that, and the third. It's because the world is easier. It's all that your spouse has known. If they've been walking on this planet for 30, 40, 50 years, all they've known is the world and the counterfeitness. That's all that they're familiar. So people get scared, especially when they're older, of fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of just different things, falling, getting hurt, things not working out, because some people are adventurous and they're willing to try new things, but other people get nervous about certain things, and so therefore they stay stuck in their ways, especially as they're older and older, right? It's all they've known. It's a creature of comfort, creature of habit. So the devil tries to make you take it personal, but in reality, it's nothing personal. It's just we all have that choice of if we're going to walk with the devil or with the Lord, right? And you chose the Lord, and you were trying to help your spouse choose the Lord as well, and the Lord was trying to help your spouse choose the Lord. And they have made some advancements and some headways. It's not like it was a complete lost cause. However, they didn't step up to the plate enough, and so you've advanced way too far, and they see that gap between them and you, and it intimidates them. It makes them feel fearful. And also, they're on a side part, like, you could be anybody, you could be, you know, any human on the planet, but because they're scared of the unknown, they're fearful, they don't want to come out of that shell, right? So what am I meaning? Say you're wanting your spouse to commit, but they're scared of commitment, just as an example. There's counterfeits that they're settling for instead because they're scared of commitment with you. It's not because those counterfeits are better or that opportunity looks better or anything. It's not. It's actually worse than you because it's a false opportunity. It's counterfeit. It's sent by the devil. It's not real or genuine. But because the spouse themselves is scared of commitment, they know that that's where it's going to lead with you sooner than later. So therefore, they would rather go settle for these counterfeits. Not because the counterfeits are better, but because they are scared of committing, right? So these counterfeits might think that they're going to commit to them, but chances are very good that the spouse is not going to commit to them. Why? Because the spouse is scared of commitment in and of itself, right? Again, another example. Say your spouse is scared of giving up their worldly ways, their sins, their drinking, their partying, you know, their secular music, you know, whatever it may be, their maybe not so good job, their dirty-ish type of job, you know, how they make money, whatever. They know that with you, because you're the real deal, they're going to have to give up all those sinful avenues, right? But because they don't want to give up those sinful avenues, not because, you know, you're not good enough to give up sinful avenues, but because that's all they've known, they're that creature of habit mentality, they choose instead to continue with those sinful lifestyle, with that drinking and partying and all these other indulgences that they partake in, and they're going to continue to do those things with the counterfeits, because the counterfeits are sent by the devil and the sinful avenues are sent by the devil, so they hold hands and go one and one with each other, right? So again, it's not anything at you, it's that the spouse is too ingrained in the ways of the world, you know, into being fearful, you know, things like this, that actually have no bearing on you or other people. It could be, the roles could switch. You could be in the world and the counterfeit would, or you could be in the world like the counterfeits and the spouse would still behave this way. The counterfeits could be in your position, right, and be walking with the Lord like you are, and it would still be this way. So it's nothing about the counterfeits and it's nothing about you. It's about the spouse being stuck in their sinful nature. They didn't quite make the cut like you did. You surrendered 100%, so therefore you made the cut and you walk with the Lord and you go off into blessing and you go off into glory. You go off into when the world is being under the judgment for the next 9 months, like the word I put out yesterday. You're not falling under that umbrella. You're on the saved side, right? You're on the green side of the pasture, so to speak. But this spouse, they were supposed to be on that green side of the pasture with you, but they were too fearful and stuck in their ways that they're choosing to settle instead and lower themselves and shake hands with the devil, and therefore stay stuck in sinful nature. Therefore, partake with counterfeit opportunities and counterfeit people. Again, it's not that, as that saying goes, everything that glitters is not gold. So the devil has made these things look glittery, so your spouse has been so the Lord is saying hypnotized into thinking that these things are gold because they've glittered, right? You're real gold, but you don't glitter. These counterfeit things aren't gold, but because they glitter, the spouse thinks that these things are gold. And the only reason that the spouse thinks these things are gold is because they lack wisdom and discernment. And the reason they lack wisdom and discernment is because they haven't chosen to walk closely with the Lord. You too in your past used to see opportunities that weren't gold glitter like gold and go for them as well. But it was only because of your relationship with the Lord that he was able to protect you and reveal, like, no, that's not what that's not what it looks like. That's not what it is. And because of that, you stay away from counterfeit things, right? And the Lord wanted that very same ability for your spouse, but because your spouse got fearful, they chose to stay stuck in their ways, etc., they are going to be left behind, right? And you're going to go off to the saved side, and they're going to be unfortunately put under judgment with everybody else that's been marked for judgment as well. Like in the word I put out yesterday about judgment is here for the wicked. Because what the Lord is saying is that it may have looked and appeared as if it was a choice between you and counterfeit things, counterfeit people. So it's versus you man versus other men, or you woman versus other woman. But the Lord is saying, no, that's not what it was. That was an illusion. What it actually was a choice between good and evil, a choice between the Lord and the devil. That's ultimately what it was. The good side or the dark side, right? And you chose the good side, which is what was the smart decision, by the way, but your spouse, unfortunately, they chose the dark side. And the only reason they chose the dark side wasn't because it was better, but because, again, it glittered in a certain way. It hypnotized your spouse. Your spouse was just used to doing things in that order for many years. They've always been a part of the world, you know, drinking, partying, doing X, Y, Z. So it's all they've ever known, right? So because of that choice of not being courageous enough, not being bold enough, not being wise enough, not being strong enough, unfortunately, your spouse has succumbed to the devil's ways. And he had an opportunity to shake hands with God or shake hands with the devil, and he or she went back to choosing the devil, right? Of course, I say he because I'm female. I speak from the female perspective. But this, again, applies to males or females, right? So unfortunately, the Lord is showing me like the Red Sea was parted and you went through, you crossed safely. Your spouse was to cross safely with you. And again, this only if this resonates with those who resonates with. But eventually, it doesn't say in the Bible that in Exodus that the Red Sea was open for years and years and years. It was open for a short window of time. But then when Pharaoh, like the enemy, was starting to encroach on them, the Lord had to shut the Red Sea back up. So that the only ones that were safe to pass through it safely was the Israelites. Once the enemy, aka Pharaoh, started to gain on them and go towards the open sea, the Lord shut the sea up, right? And then Pharaoh's army drowned. That's what the Bible story says. So the Lord is saying that very same circumstance has happened, is that the Lord parted the Red Sea, symbolically today, like in 2024 here, and your spouse was to cross and embark through that threshold with you, right? And be spared and saved. But because your spouse, I put out words about this, that the sands in the hourglass were falling out, and this was like a month ago. So over the course of the Lord, the Lord's talking to me while I'm talking. The Lord was pouring out the wrath back in March, like I said in yesterday's work. We're in June. So for the last 3 months, the Lord has been putting a lot of pressure on you, and also specifically, particularly your spouse, to make this choice and decision. It was either going to make or break your spouse. They were either going to move to the right or to the left. No more lukewarm, dancing in the middle like your spouse had been all through 2023. It was time for a choice to be made, right? And so I made words about this, especially about a month ago, those back-to-back Kingdom Spouse words, speaking on this specifically, where it was the 11th hour for your spouse to make this decision of what side they were going to choose on, because as the word says, if you're lukewarm, the Lord spits you out. So the Lord was not going to continue to allow your spouse to just walk the middle road anymore, because the Lord knew that this Red Sea moment was going to be coming up, where the Lord was going to divide the wheats from the tares and separate the Israelites from Pharaoh and his army, the good from the bad, and that the good are going to be spared and the bad won't be. They're going to drown, right? So in the wrath. And so the Lord ultimately wanted for you and your spouse, like Adam and Eve, to go into the proverbial Garden of Eden and into the safety and move through. And the Lord parted the sea for this specifically. But in these last 3 months in particular, your spouse has decided, like I've already said, to, step down and go wallow and mix with the enemy and play with Pharaoh and his army instead. And as a result, unfortunately, because of that decision, time has ran up. The decision's been made. The last final grains of the hourglass have already ran out. The Lord has already went ahead and separated the Red Sea, and you've went through, and your spouse has been left behind. If you're separated in the physical world, I wouldn't be shocked, because you've already been spiritually separated. Now, for some of you, maybe your spouse did make the cut with you and they went through the part of the sea and they went along with you, that's awesome, great, congratulations. But for others of you, if you're on this journey and you've noticed that there's been a separation, whether it be physically, spiritually, or both, that's not strange. It's because the time had ran up in recent here, and it was running up, the Lord had put out his final warning. It was the 11th hour for the spouse, and they had to make or break their decision, and the spouse chose they chose wrong. Ultimately, they chose their old lifestyle, they chose their counterfeits, their counterfeit spouses, their counterfeit friends, their counterfeit opportunities, and as a result, unfortunately, you've moved forward, and they're going to now drown with Pharaoh and his army, because the Lord is saying they technically chose the devil's team over the Lord's team, and that was the wrong decision to make. So your spouse is going to be going under wrath for the next, 6 to 9 months, right? As we put out the word yesterday, for the rest of the duration of this year. And who knows what comes from that, right? Who knows what's going to happen next year after everyone goes under this wrathful judgment? I'll make words on that more so when the Lord leads me to when the time comes. But this is what the Lord is saying, where we're at now, right? What's happened in the last month, what's happening currently, and prophesied for the next month. This is kind of like a 3-month interval. Is that this is where your if this resonates, this is where your situation has been over the course of the last month, where it's at currently this month, so where it was at in May, where it's at in June, and where it'll be at in July. Past, present, and future information, right? Revelation. So these counterfeits may think that your spouse chose them. Your spouse did not choose the counterfeits. They chose the devil. That's ultimately what it is. There was opportunities presented to your spouse from the Lord, and there was opportunities presented to your spouse from the devil. The Lord is saying that your spouse ultimately continued to choose the devil over and over again, all while simultaneously you kept choosing God over and over again. Therefore, you kept growing and your spouse kept shrinking because he's choosing the wrong side. So therefore, when the parting of the sea comes, only one half of the people move forward into safety and the other half of the people drowned off, right? It wasn't this mixture, whatever it was. One chunk of people advanced, one chunk of people stayed behind, and those that stayed behind they perished, right? So whether that be, in the Bible it says they drowned, right? So it was a physical perishing, but the Lord is also saying like a spiritual perishing. So again, I already said yesterday, some of these people, including your spouses, are going to physically perish. Others of them are not going to physically perish, but they will spiritually perish. Because the Lord is not going to serve a consequence when he gave you an ample amount of time to choose him or the devil, and he made it very clear in various ways to these spouses who's on what team. The Lord is saying your spouse chose the devil's team, not because the spouse didn't care about you, not because you're not good enough, not because of this, that, and the third, but because the spouse was hypnotized by the way of the devil, and also they thought that these counterfeit things, because they glittered, that they must be gold, but they're wrong. And also for their own fear, their own trauma, and their own fear, and things that they hold inside is what ultimately drove their decisions, right? And so the Lord was offering your spouse healing. The Lord was offering your spouse happiness. The Lord was offering your spouse joy. The Lord was offering your spouse peace. The Lord was offering your spouse stability. The Lord was offering your spouse true, real, trustworthy partnerships, right? This is what the Lord had on the other side of this Red Sea for your spouse. But because your spouse chose to dance with the devil, they snubbed the Lord and they chose the devil instead. They saw the Lord's golden and beautiful opportunity, but chose to fall for fool's gold, chase fool's gold and false opportunities instead. The Lord is saying that unfortunately now moving forward, they're now going to drown. And again, you can take that from a physical standpoint or a spiritual standpoint, but now they're going to drown in the choice that they made. So what this looks like for your spouse moving forward is, instead of happiness, there's going to be heartbreak. Instead of peace, there's going to be turmoil and chaos. Instead of joy, there's going to be tormenting, right? Instead of blessings, there's now going to be no blessings. So basically, if your spouse was already having a hard time in life, they were suffering through trauma and not being happy, not being content, feeling tormented and under turmoil and disappointment and all these negative things, the Lord had an opportunity for them to recycle and trade in those negative things for good, positive things. They snubbed the opportunity, and the Lord gave them ample time to make the choice. So therefore, unfortunately, they're going to fall onto their own sword. Like I said out of the scripture yesterday, out of the word where I was talking about Saul fell on his own sword. So these spouses are going to fall on their own sword as well, right? Meanwhile, you are going to be over on the other side in, peace, joy, happiness, bliss, contentment, blessing, all the things that the Lord had promised you and your spouse. You will get it and your spouse won't. And no, it's not because you weren't good enough, or the counterfeit was better, or this was this or this was that. It was because ultimately God is saying that a choice was presented to your spouse numerous times. The choice being God versus the devil, your Eve or your Adam versus the counterfeit Jezebels, and your spouse got mixed up. They thought that the Jezebels were Eve and that Eve was the Jezebels, and that Adam was the Jezebel and the Jezebel was Adam. So therefore, or Ahab, the Lord is saying that Adam was Ahab and Ahab was Adam. Either way, the Lord, your spouse got mixed up, and the reason they got things mixed up was because they were hypnotized and because of their own fears and traumas. So unfortunately, it is what it is. There, it's no hard feelings, right? Like, you forgive what's happened. The Lord will move you into something new, a new opportunity, because you're going to be on the green side of the pasture. And unfortunately, the spouse will be on the dark side because they chose the dark side, right? And so God is saying that maybe it made manifest in your world and in your perception as, the devil tried to make it look like you versus this or this versus you. But in reality, it wasn't. It was God versus the devil, because these counterfeits that your spouse has chosen, counterfeit relationships, counterfeit friends, counterfeit people, counterfeit opportunities, they were all dressed up to look a certain way to confuse and delude and scam your spouse. And the Lord was trying to help your spouse with discernment, which is fortunately a gift you have to see it for what it really was. But unfortunately, your spouse's traumas and everything got the best of them, and they just couldn't see. You had spiritual glasses and spiritual eyes. You could see with clarity, and they didn't. They were blinded. And now it's going to be to their own fault. And the Lord is saying that he has it set up in such a way that there's no one that the spouse can blame but themselves. They may have blamed you in these recent months because they had this choice in front of them, but the Lord is saying that once push comes to shove in the future, as it ultimately will, that the only person that the spouse, it's set up so that the only person that the spouse can blame is themselves, for their lack of strength and their lack of courage and clarity and, understanding and things like that. So pray for your spouse, pray, during their time of judgment. But the Lord is saying that they need this time of judgment, that, the Lord doesn't waste anything. Everything is not for naught. This is intentional so that your spouse can go through this cleansing, pruning, washing period, aka judgment, to get disciplined and whipped into the shape that the Lord wants your spouse to be into. So, it is what it is. You chose the light side, the good side, therefore you're spared and saved on the dry land. Your spouse chose the dark side, the wrong side, the evil side, so therefore they're going to be closed up in the proverbial waters and drowned in the proverbial waters with all the other evildoers as well, right? And again, like the word said yesterday, the scripture, some of the people won't come out of this. They really truly will perish. And the Lord is saying by falling on their own sword. Others of them will come out of this, but again, only if they choose the light side that they should have chose the year before. So they maybe will end up choosing God ultimately in the future, but they should have just done it last year when they were supposed to, and then this wouldn't have had to happen, right? But again, the Lord is saying that's not for you to have to worry about, because the Lord is leading you into the Garden of Eden, right? And unfortunately, the spouse just didn't make the cut, and it's nothing personal. The devil wants to make it like, to you and God that like, oh, I won, but God is saying, how did Pharaoh's army win? It was clear if you read the book of Exodus, the story, that the Israelites won. right? The Israelites won. How did Pharaoh's army win when they drowned? But the devil wants to make it appear that way, and so that's why the Lord sent me on this, message today to say, no, like if this message resonates with you, that, ignore all of that, because this is what it really is. So if you're dealing with something that looks a certain way in the physical world, this is what it really is behind the scenes in the spiritual context. This is what it ultimately happened. So if, these counterfeits, if the devil's trying to make it like, these counterfeits won some sort of prize, they didn't win a prize. All the counterfeits won was a cup of wrath, and all your spouse won was a cup of wrath. And what you won was no wrath. And you're, like I said, on the good side of things, and they're not. So continue to pray for your spouse. They'll need your prayers as they're going through this judgment. And it's not surprising or shocking. I was putting words out on this subject over the course of the last 6 months in particular, because that's when the Lord had this really coming, these situations coming to a head, right? And the Lord is saying that in particular in this last month or so, He had really put the pressure on your spouse to make this final decision. Either you turn the right way or you go the wrong way. And like I said already, your spouse unfortunately chose the wrong way. So, so I hope this brings clarity. I hope it makes sense. I hope it kind of sets things straight. And the Lord's just saying for me to add one more thing. If you were waiting on your spouse and, you're no longer in that waiting position any longer because of said reasons, and your spouse is, turned away their backs from you and ultimately from the Lord, and they're in the mix with the world now, and the doors have closed and the sea has closed, that if these counterfeits around them think that they're going to get something out of this, they're not, because the whole Garden of Eden blessing, the good side that was the light that they saw shining up ahead, that was with you. That light they saw was you and the Lord. That light was not the spouse. The spouse was to join in that light with you and the Lord as a triple braided cord, but the spouse chose differently. So therefore, when they saw that blinding light up ahead that they were, enticed by, sorry about the background, that's my little guy playing. They thought that maybe that could be them, that they're now going to be in the Garden of Eden, they're now you, and the tables have turned. Just a second. Sorry about that. And that they're going to be you, and that they're going to receive the opportunities that were intentionally for you, that the Lord set out for you. They're not. Like I said, they're going to go under. Your spouse is going to go under, and so are they. And the Lord is going to be showing that these counterfeits didn't win a prize with your spouse, because the spouse was supposed to be with you. And the Lord is going to show your spouse that they didn't win a prize with these counterfeits, that, there's no goodness that comes out of evil. These counterfeits are evil, and your spouse was falling into evil. So therefore, it's just evil mixed with evil. There's no goodness that comes out of that. So if your spouse thinks that they're going to get the things that were promised with you now without you in the counterfeit world, they're not. And if these vice versa, if these counterfeits think that these counterfeit friends, partners, situations, etc., think that they're going to get ahead or get some sort of blessing off of the spouse, they're not. The blessing part laid with you and the Lord. And so the Lord will either put somebody else in that spouse's place for you so that the triple braided cord can continue, or that triple braided cord may just be yourself and Jesus Christ and Father God, right? That's a triple braided cord as well. So it just depends. It depends on what the Lord has in the future for you. The Lord just wanted me to clarify that these counterfeits think that they're going to win some sort of prize, and they're going to be sadly mistaken. And if your spouse thinks that they're still going to receive some sort of prize by making this poor decision, they're going to be sadly mistaken. So yeah, anyways, the Lord just wanted me to add that as well. So anyways, I gotta get going because my little guy is so loud. Sorry about that. I hope this finds you well. I hope it finds those who it needs to resonate with. I hope it makes sense. I hope that it can bring you some revelation and or confirmation. I hope it can bless you, and take care. God bless.